Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our humble abode. I want to start right off with scripture tonight. Let me bring it back up on the screen. Let me know that you can see and hear me in the chat room. Lots of people in chat tonight. Very active in there. Welcome, everyone. And give me a thumbs up in the chat room. Just trying to get my screen to change. If it will cooperate. Here it goes. Isaiah 41:10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will surely help you. I will uphold you with my right hand of righteousness.
I hope they can't see me if I come in now.
You want to sit over here?
I do.
Come on. All right, my wife is just coming in the room. She won't be on camera tonight, but she's going to take up the other chair in our vast studio here. It's almost as good as the EIB network. Anyway, we have a lot to cover tonight, as always, and I always say that. Tonight is going to be a rapid fire headline, so I'm just going to go through and cover a lot. And in so doing, it may sound like we're promoting fear or generating anxiety. There's just so much to cover that I want to cover the headlines that may be touch points for you to go and take a look at your leisure in more depth, just to kind of point you in a few directions tonight. I won't read a lot from the articles. I'm going to give you my observations and my thoughts, because that's really what you're seeking, is not so much reading articles to you, but the perspective that Kathleen and I bring to the table on these various topics. So there are going to be a lot of them tonight. Many of these come from you as patrons, and that was my thinking tonight. Was, first off, let's get rid of the fear, because God's in control of all of this. This is all under His umbrella, His plan. But the other is that I want to reflect back what is being contributed by patrons, and certainly the number of emails that we are receiving certainly are increasing every single day. And with that, it gets kind of tough to respond to every one of them, and you guys know that, but we try. And if nothing else, but to at least say thank you for sending it. But again, I want to reflect back what are the interests and what are the thoughts about you as patrons by sharing what others are contributing. So that's kind of where we're coming from tonight. Again, it's not to generate fear, it's just to keep you up to date on what's going on. Now, one of the things that, sort of my opening monologue, if you will, is this. I have said that the most valuable commodity on the planet is prognostication, foretelling the future through divination. Not that we're advocating divination, but that's the technology that is used. And specifically, we talk about quantum computers, and specifically even more D-Wave systems, quantum computers. And I know that there are others that are out there working on quantum computing, but really, they're Johnny-come-latelys. And I'm not an advocate of D-Wave systems. I'm simply saying they've been involved for so long, they're so far ahead of everyone else. And yes, there are two distinct camps of thinking in terms of quantum computing and the approach to quantum computing, and therefore two basic camps of qubits. I'm not going to get into technology tonight. We're going to get into the headlines. But what I'm setting up the stage for here is that in all of the extensive coverage we've provided to quantum computing, whether it's Google, IBM, Rigetti, Microsoft, any of them, Fairchild, someone sent me an email today about Fairchild, developing, quantum computers through the cloud for everyone, and that they will be the best quantum computer available. Well, again, I'm not an advocate of D-Wave, not a promoter of D-Wave, simply stating the facts, and that is that D-Wave just rolled out, as I sent to you a few days ago, Leap 2, which is their next generation of cloud access quantum computing. And so, it's interesting. I read these articles, including the one regarding Fairchild sent to me today, and most every time I read these articles about quantum computing today, they leave out D-Wave. They cite everybody else, but they don't cite D-Wave in most of the articles. It's very interesting. I think, again, it speaks to obfuscation of who is really the leader in the marketplace, who is the leader in the technology, and really who has if there is a best approach, the best approach in quantum computing is D-Wave Systems. Now, with all of that review, because we always have new patrons coming in, and I thank everyone, including the new patrons, for being with us. The idea here regarding quantum computing and prognostication, which is what comes about through quantum computing and is seldom understood by those that talk about quantum computing, is this. We know that D-Wave specifically has conducted through their operating system, which is combinatorial optimization, producing optimum patterns. For example, one of the tried and true that they always trot out is where to post taxis. Interestingly, this first began with an example in Beijing, China, utilizing D-Wave quantum computing in China. Okay? But where to stage taxis so that they would be most efficiently deployed and utilized throughout Beijing. This is an example of not so much prognostication, although they're anticipating where the demand will be at any given time in the city. I want to relate this to COVID-19 because quantum computing was developed primarily, and again, many people don't discuss this when they talk about quantum computing, but I've shared with you for years that the impetus behind developing quantum computing was for the purpose of advancing artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence learns through observation, primarily in the early stages observing patterns of human behavior. Apply this immediately to COVID-19. Okay? We're dispelling the fear here, but the understanding worldwide is that the world is becoming gripped by fear. As such, their behavior is being observed through quantum computers driving the highest echelon of artificial intelligence. That echelon, that level, is learning by observing human behavior. Now, many of us have paid attention to 6 months ago when Bill Gates and others were involved in this pandemic drill 6 months ago. And of course, we've all related that to, predictive programming and advanced warning of a false flag and those types of things. Whenever we see a drill announced, we can expect the real thing. That's obviously unfolded with COVID-19. The point here is that when producing those tabletop exercises, those drills, AI is learning from the humans involved in the drills. And again, these are just in rooms, tabletop exercises. There's nothing going on outside. But they're learning from what are the humans contributing to the tabletop exercise. Now, take that 6 months and 8 months now and bring it fast forward to today, now really 9 months. AI is observing the reaction to COVID-19 being deployed. And I use that word specifically, deployed. But where's the prognostication? That occurred through the tabletop exercise. That prediction of how would humans respond to the release, the deployment of COVID-19. I know many of you can appreciate the background on quantum computing that I've provided to you in the sense that it has the ability to look at all probable solutions, all probable circumstances. It's not omniscient and it's not all-knowing, but it is able to take in vast amounts of data, in excess of any transistor-based supercomputer, and look at these points of data simultaneously. And this is something that most of us don't really appreciate, just how much data it can look at any given time. Now, soon to be released by D-Wave is their 5,000 plus qubit quantum computer. And I've been talking about this for almost a year now, letting you know that it was coming, okay? We are faced with a artificial intelligence system that is driven by quantum computing that can process information, that can look at information on a real-time basis, far beyond what we really are aware of, what we can extrapolate, what we can imagine. That doesn't make it all-knowing and all-powerful. That's, it's not the Wizard of Oz kind of situation here, but what we don't know is what it knows. It predicted human response, human behavior to the deployment of COVID-19. And in real time, it's tracking not only the spread, but it is tracking our responses. Again, edge computing, nanotechnology, sensors, all of the dust, diamond dust material, all the things we've covered before are all being employed right now. And of course, as we've covered in the last couple of live streams, the deployment of COVID-19 thus activated by 5G wireless technology, altering the electron spin of oxygen and iron in the hemoglobin. And when I say altering the spin, I'm talking about changing its angular momentum and its affinity for other electrons. Most people don't get down in the weeds about really explaining 5G and how it affects, how it triggers, literally triggers COVID-19, but we've explained that in the last couple of live streams. What I'm driving home here is that AI is predicting where COVID will spread. And that isn't hard to do because the spread is a function of the targeting by 5G wireless broadcasts. Where the 5G targets is where the eruption in cases and deaths occur. So it isn't hard for AI to predict because it is literally directing 5G targeting and activation of COVID-19. I don't think there's too many people that have made that connection regarding 5G and COVID-19 with respect to both quantum computing and its driving of the highest echelon of AI. Okay? What this means is it isn't hard to predict where it's going to occur, where the outbreaks will occur. But coupled with that, this high echelon of AI has the ability to anticipate the reaction of the public. And that's where I want to take you to step 2 in this opening monologue before we get into all these articles. Step 2. Step 1 is quantum computing and AI driving the targeting. Step 2 is the testing. We go from targeting to testing. What is building up right now throughout the world, but let's focus on the United States because we have more information regarding what CDC is saying and what the president is saying and what the vice president's saying and all of these good things. What is ramping up? Again, by way of problem, reaction, solution is testing. The problem that they have openly presented, the president and the vice president and the CDC, is that the CDC made a mistake with their test kits. The first ones went out with 3 components, one of which was invalid. So they had to fall back, regroup, come up with new test kits, and now they're talking about deploying, so far, at least 1 million test kits in the United States. They haven't really described who will be first to be tested. I would expect, in a logical sense, common sense approach, it'll be first responders and professional healthcare workers, healthcare providers, your doctors, your nurses, your nursing assistants, physician assistants, people who work in clinics, etc., your frontline healthcare people, and your first responders, all the way through to paramedics. Okay? I would expect they will be the ones, because how it will be sold is, hey, we have to protect those that are protecting you. We have to help protect those, make sure that they're okay if they're going to help you. So that's kind of common sense. But the real point in bringing up testing is this. AI knows how people will respond to testing. More specifically, how people will respond to the results of the testing. Right now, numbers are suspicious. Numbers are inaccurate. Numbers are bounced around, and I provided to you the Johns Hopkins dashboard of worldwide cases, infections, and deaths. Sent that to you before the live stream. I'll bring it up here again. But the point here is, when the testing really gets underway, it will generate numbers. Numbers of people that are infected, numbers of people, unfortunately, that have succumbed to it, that have died. Don't have to have a test for those that died, but those that will be tested and then subsequently succumb to the virus. The numbers are the tipping point. The numbers are the tipping point to the fear factor in the general population. So far, people have discounted what's going on in terms of numbers that come out of China because nobody trusts the numbers. So the initial behavior on the part of most people is to discount it completely and say, look, they don't have accurate numbers, so I'm not going to get excited until they have accurate numbers. So, problem has been created, including the test kits. The reaction has been kind of minimal, but that's been expected by the AI systems. But the reaction that they're really expecting, and that they are purposely going to present, is that when the numbers come in from not just the first million, but when there are multiple millions of test kits, and I don't think it needs to go into the multiple millions. I think as they roll out the test kits, the numbers start generating even up to the first distribution of 1 million test kits. The numbers are going to start pouring in, and they will be labeled. Remember, we talked about labeling of data when we talked about AI? The data will be labeled, meaning it will be validated. It will be blessed as valid numbers. Now that takes away the whole scenario, as I said about China, where people say, look, the numbers aren't real, they're fabricated, or they're misleading, or whatever. I'm just not even going to worry about it. Even numbers in the United States or other countries, people are just kind of like, I just can't really trust these numbers. And no, we can't. We as individuals have no way to vet these numbers, to verify them. We just receive them through the media. But I'm driving to this point. Once the numbers that come in, let's focus on the U.S. again, from testing that are labeled by CDC and President Trump and Vice President Pence, and they say, hey, These are valid numbers, and they're frightening, and they're off the charts. It's an exponential explosion. It's a valid pandemic in the United States. We have to clamp down. That's when the tipping point of fear will hit. And you know the first evidence of that tipping point are the grocery stores. This is why Kathleen and I talked to you in the last live stream about taking prudent steps, prudent action. I sent you a link to a site for storing water regarding bleach and how to properly. The bottom line is, if you can still find them, there are water purification tablets. Go to a sporting goods store. Go to Cabela's. Go to, what's the one down the road that we went to that time? Cabela's and Bass. Bass Pro. You know, go to the camping supply places and they have the little glass bottles of tablets for purifying water when you're out camping. That's the best way to go to start with, if you can still find them. The other way is bleach, and there are some guidelines that I sent to you on using bleach. Be careful with bleach. Understand that you need to use, small diluted quantities, especially if you're just making up gallon jugs. But refer to that. I want to stay on point. The numbers. When the numbers are blessed and the numbers are huge, and the government is saying, whoa, we're testing and the problem's bigger than we thought. Everybody's running to the big box store. So be prudent. Not generating fear, not hyping it up, just simply stating to you what AI pays attention to, and AI knows about us. And it's not hard to figure out. I got an email from someone yesterday who said, all you have to do is look at what happens on Black Friday. And I had said that a few days ago to Kathleen. I said, look what happens on Black Friday. People go nuts. It's going to be that on steroids. My advice is, obviously, to be prudent ahead of time, and we're getting close to where they're going to roll out these test kits, so we're seeing the clock ticking on this. But you want to be prepared with the mindset that you don't want to find yourself having to go to a big box store. Your local neighborhood mom and pop stores, small groceries, things like that, they're going to be reasonably accessible, but even those eventually are going to be overrun. But the first thing that the people do when they panic is they think about buying large quantities of stuff in a hurry. If you find yourself, for whatever reason, having to go to a big box store, think about personal safety, personal security. And it may not be so much inside the store. That's going to be bad enough. People are going to be pretty ticked off in the stores. But it's out in the parking lots, and it's down the road a block or two. Unfortunately, you have to think about people that are going to hijack a car that is loaded with supplies. They don't have to deal with the crowds in the store. They don't have to pay for it. All they have to do is stick a gun in your face at the next stoplight and take your vehicle and all of your supplies. You have to think this way, unfortunately, folks. This is not promoting fear. This is being prudent. This is being reasonable. This is thinking differently now. We are critical thinkers. We think independently. We do not think like the herd. The herd mentality is all like lemmings going off the cliff. The lemmings going to the big box store, and they're going to be victimized. Don't find yourself in that situation. So we are rapidly moving to the deployment of test kits, generating of numbers blessed by the government as valid. Tipping point, everybody cuts loose. Right now, as we have personally experienced in this neighborhood, we had a neighbor across the street who said, oh, conspiracy theorists. They weren't talking to Kathleen and myself. They were talking to a relative. But, oh, it's all conspiracy theory. It's all those conspiracy theorists. Just before the live stream, one of our patrons sent something to me regarding conspiracy theory, and I responded back with what I'm going to say now, and that is simply this, that we have known for years that the whole psychological operation of the phrase conspiracy theorist was meant as a trigger phrase. And I've said this for years. It's a trigger phrase for those that do not think independently, that are not critical thinkers, that are caught up in the complacency and the programming. They have been programmed over the years to immediately discount anything coming from someone who appears, who has that flavoring of a conspiracy theorist, whether in person or online. The unfortunate thing is they don't realize that they've been programmed and that they've been thus triggered to shut down that prefrontal cortex, to shut down that critical thinking, and immediately just say, I'm not going to hear it. Okay? Some people call this cognitive dissonance, and that's valid, but the other point is that it is purposeful. It's been put out into the population to completely deny what really are facts and truth. Yes, there are those that are conspiracy theorists, but the bottom line is what we're seeing right now with COVID-19 and 5G is not theory. We're living it real time right now. It's not a theory, but it is a conspiracy. And I think most of you would agree with that. And yet you will have the people who are still fixated on, unless I hear it coming out of the mainstream media, it's all conspiracy theory. If it comes out of YouTube, and I always make fun of YouTube, but I'm on YouTube. But if somebody says, well, I heard this doctor on YouTube talking about COVID-19, and he's an MD, and he's an epidemiologist, and he's got all the pedigree, they don't even want to hear that. It came from YouTube, so it can't be. It's got to be a conspiracy theory. Or articles that are online, despite the fact that the articles have links to white papers and bona fide sources of research information. Nope, conspiracy theories. Nope, not going to hear it. Fine. Okay? Scripture tells us there will be, in these days, scoffers and mockers. You know, you can't cast your pearls before swine. My wife often tells me that an awful lot, and she's right. There's just some people who are just not going to hear. So we focus on those that will hear. The eyes to see, the ears to hear. Okay? So remember, what you can expect are numbers coming out of testing tipping point. That's what's in it for you and I. That's what we always try to take it to. Okay? Now, I want also, because my wife reminded me, Kathleen reminded me that yesterday, last evening in Tennessee, there was a significant tornado that ripped through Tennessee, and our prayers, absolutely our prayers go out to everyone who's been affected by that. And fortunately, here in our group, Doug Diamond, who lives in Tennessee, is on the other side of town from where the tornado tore through. So, not as far-reaching and making headlines as COVID-19, but certainly you can appreciate the devastation that's going on real time right now with those folks that had to deal with not COVID-19, but a tornado. So there's an awful lot still going on in this world outside of the world of viruses and 5G. But it speaks to the times that we're in. And again, as you know, we were saying in the last live stream, our redemption draws near. That's where the joy should come from. Yes, we pray for those that are affected by whatever calamity comes along in life. even our friends here that have personal health issues that are ongoing and happening right now. But the most powerful weapon system on the planet is not quantum computing and AI, it is prayer. And as we've tried to encourage, make it focused prayer. I said in the last live stream, if you want to really focus your weapon system of prayer against COVID-19, focus on electrons. I know it sounds bizarre and geeky, but that's what Satan is manipulating. He's manipulating the fundamental particles that God created, whether it's COVID-19 or quantum computers, chemistry, biology, DNA. It all comes down to the subatomic particles that Satan has influence over. And that's how he's manipulating our thoughts, manipulating our biology, our behavior, our health, and manipulating the environment at large, is at the fundamental particle level. And I know on occasion there, I hate to bring up the naysayers and the detractors, but I'll say this briefly. Every once in a while I'll get an email, because I don't allow comments on the videos I post for obvious reasons. But I get emails that get posted to my contact tab at anthonypatch.com, and once in a while I'll get at some detractor, some troll, say, what does quantum computing, quantum mechanics, particle physics, what does that have to do with salvation? What does that have to do with the Bible? What does that have to do with bringing people to the Lord? Well, you guys know. But those are the kind of ridiculous emails I get on occasion. They don't understand that physical mass is under the influence of the spiritual world. You cannot separate the physical from the spiritual. And Satan has been given dominion over this material world. It is soon to be his kingdom under the Antichrist. So he already has. We've talked about the governors and all of that. Material, matter, mass, fundamental particles are all under the purview, not creation, but influence spiritually of Satan and his minions. That's why we focus on the science that we do here. Okay? In the March issue of Entangle magazine, I devoted and dedicated that to economics, economic contagion. Yesterday, the Federal Reserve, as expected, cut interest rates. They cut the prime rate tied to the 10-year yield of Treasury notes, of bonds. But the short-term bond rates were cut, the 10-year, down to 0.9%, less than 1%, while the Fed, on an emergency basis for the first time, cut the basis points by half, 0.50 basis points. What this means is it lowers the bond rate, it reduces the interest rate charged by banks on loans, it reduces the prime lending rate, which on the surface sounds like a really cool thing. If you were looking to take out a loan for some reason, there's the possibility that the interest you pay on a loan will be lower. But why did the Fed do it? The Fed did it to prop up the stock market, which has been tanking over all of last week because of the supply chain interruption due to COVID-19, the fears of COVID-19. So the stock market reacts to the virus not because of the virus itself, but indirectly because of the disruption in the supply chain. I gave you in the magazine that the primary indicator to follow is the yield curve. So when we're looking at, and I think I have a graphic, yeah I do, let's look at the yield curve. And again, this is just an example. It doesn't mean it's real time today, but this is what's been going on over the last week and into today, is this drop in the short-term bond market. That's the yield, the interest rate. What does that mean to you and I? Okay, so we're not investors in the bond market. We could care less about the bond market. What it means is, I'm trying to get my camera to come back on. Very slow tonight. When the interest rates drop on bonds, whether they're short-term or long-term is out to 30 years. What it means is that the Federal Reserve is pumping more money, printing, if you will, but it's just digital on a computer, putting more money, more liquidity into the market. That liquidity, and that was today, it was $105 billion pumped into the market today, into what is called the repo market. Now, if you've read the magazine, you've got some of this terminology under your belt. I gave you all of this terminology, whether it's repo market, yield curve, quantitative easing, short-term, long-term bond markets, because I want you to understand the words you're going to start hearing a lot more. If since Monday you've been paying attention to the market, you've been paying attention to financial reports, just no matter where they're coming from, president's mouth or, mainstream media or alternative media, these words like yield curve, bond market, quantitative easing, and even something that most people have never heard of, the repo market, I gave you those definitions, I gave you their background, I gave you their applications, how they're used, and I gave you the ramifications of their use. What's the cause and effect within the markets? So that when you hear these terms being thrown out in the media, you understand the implications of up and down numbers. What the president wants to focus on is the market, okay? The Dow Jones Industrial, okay? The NASDAQ. Well, that all gets propped up by underlying mechanisms, and that's what I've shown you, are the underlying mechanisms, the gears in the machine. So what does it mean when the Fed drops the interest rate on bonds? In order to do that, the Fed has to go further into debt. It has to present what is known as the repo market, $105 billion liquidity of money, digital printing of money into the market. Because what happens is, when there is an excess demand for loans, for credit, and a bank cannot meet that demand with their own reserves, and they can't get more from the Fed in terms of money because the liquidity is not there, the money market has dried up, and the bank can't get more money to then loan out to a customer, that stops the credit market. When you stop the credit market, that means you cannot produce more debt, which is the result of taking out a loan. The economy is based upon debt generation. If you cannot generate debt, then you cannot buy and sell. The market, the economy grinds to a halt. The gears aren't turning. In order to get the gears turning, to get money into the hands of a bank, to then loan, and that the proceeds of that loan go into the economy for buying and selling, the Fed has to go further into debt by digitally printing more money and sending that money to those banks. The banks purchase it, of course, but they purchase it at a lower interest rate. So when the bond market comes down, the cost of money comes down to the banks, and they can buy that money from the Fed, raise the interest rate that they're going to charge to a customer for the loan that they extend. That keeps the gears turning. So the Fed, in the RO, the repo market, that means that overnight, and this is only supposed to be a spike, it's only supposed to be a one-time deal. It's supposed to be an emergency infusion of money into the banks overnight because they don't have enough in their reserves overnight, which is typically supposed to be 10% of what they loan out. So the Fed comes to the rescue for the banks and says, hey, overnight, we're going to print up all this money, and in the morning, you'll have more money that you can open your doors and make more loans and keep the gears turning. And the banks love it, and the market loves it. So the market goes up, the stock market goes up when the cost of money, the bonds, goes down, and there's an infusion through the repo market overnight of cash into the banks. And that drives the markets up higher and higher. And that's all the president is focused on. And he's demanding that, and just prior to Tuesday's emergency 50 basis point reduction in the short-term bond yield, the president is now calling for even further additional cuts in the bond yield. And that bond yield is inverted, it's plummeting. In other words, the president wants the Fed to continue to print more money. And every time that printing, even though it's digital, takes place, the government goes further and further and further into debt. And so do all Americans go further into debt because the gears turning are lubricated by debt. The oil of the machine is debt, and without it, the wheels grind to a halt. Now, the president wanting the Fed, and it's all, it's all show, it's all, hysterics on the part of the president, to demand that the Fed do more and cut rates even more. So now in April, when they have their first, for 2020, scheduled Fed meeting, they're looking at dropping the rates even further. But the president's trying, because he's campaigning, trying to make it look like it's because he's demanding the Fed do this. It has nothing to do with what the president says. It all has to do with the central bank. Every country on the planet has a central bank. The central bank, not the government, the central bankers control the government and the economies of each country. And because they're all interconnected, the economies of the world. So when we talk about the one percenters, get more specific, drive down deeper. Don't just talk about one percenters. You have to be specific, and that's the central bankers, the equivalent in other nations of the Fed. I mentioned the Bank of London in the last live stream. Okay? That's where all of this initiates from. The sole purpose of the Fed is to generate more debt, to lubricate the gears. That's the only reason they're there. Because by generating more debt and the machine continuing to operate faster and faster, the markets go up. And that's where the robbery takes place. That's where the theft takes place from people like you and me, the average investor. That's where the one percenters make their billions and trillions of dollars, is the market being driven up. And the Fed does that on purpose. And that's why the president focuses on the Fed and the cutting of rates. Because the president is addressing not just the demand, but the greed of the one percenters that want the market to keep going up and up. But this is all by design to bring us to the point where there can be no more rate reductions, and bring us to the point where there can no longer be the digital generation of debt. And this is where what I've presented to you, the debt forgiveness, takes place. The debt clock. Those of you that have read my first novel, Covert Catastrophe, published in 2013, the president is in San Francisco standing in front of the Transamerica Pyramid on the waterfront, and he's addressing the world at a podium, and he has a big red button, kind of like the Staples button, right? He has a big red button on the podium, and he hits that button, and there's a reader board of numbers a debt clock worldwide, not just US, but world debt clock. And he brings it to a halt. Then he hits another button on the podium, and it reverses the numbers all the way back to zero. The entire reader board is a string of zeros. That's the debt reset. I published that in 2013. We are very quickly arriving at that point. The Fed is scheduled in April for their first meeting, as I said. They might have another emergency rate cut before they meet in April, but they're going to go dark for 10 days. They don't make any public statements for 10 days. Then they have their meeting in April, and then they make their announcement. So they're supposed to cut the rates again. Then they're scheduled in September and again in November. The expectation each time, each meeting, is to continue to drop them. Well, we're almost to zero already. The 10-year bond was at 0.9. It went up just above 1% today, but it's plummeting. So what happens when you get to zero? Well, the president's also been ranting and raving and saying, we have to go to negative interest rates. What? What the heck is a negative interest rate? I thought interest rates were things that people pay and people earn. Well, I'm here to explain what a negative interest rate is. The media will tell you, hey, if you take out a loan from your local bank and it's a negative interest rate, let's say it's negative 0.5%. The media will tell you, and this is coming, folks, they'll tell you, they'll do the used car salesman song and dance with you. The guy in the plaid shirt and the white shoes, the white belt. And they'll tell you, you're going to get paid to take a loan out. You're going to get paid 0.5% in interest to take a loan out. We are so desperate as bankers to keep the wheels moving, keep the gears moving. We have to have more debt to lubricate the gears for buying and selling of the economy. We must lend money, so we're going to pay you to borrow money from the bank. Sounds great. If I was going to go buy a house, I think I would enjoy being paid for a mortgage. 0.5%. Okay, what's the 180? What's the truth? If you have money on deposit, if you are fortunate enough to have a savings account, to have a retirement account held in a financial institution, the banks, all holding institutions, will charge you. We're using 0.5% as our example. They will charge you 0.5%, and they'll call it a service fee. Banks love service fees. People are used to them. They've been programmed to accept service fees from the banks. They're going to say, well, it costs us money to hold your digital numbers of your savings account, retirement account, in our computer system, because it's all ones and zeros. It costs us money. So we're going to charge you because you want to keep your money in our bank. You remember years ago with checking accounts, you actually had to pay a service fee for a checking account. And then they became free checking. It was a big giveaway. It was a big promotional thing. Have a checking account with us. It's free checking. Remember? And they would even charge you for the printing of the checks because they wanted your money on deposit, because it goes into their reserve, their 10%. And then they, with their fractional lending, they can take those monies on deposit and compound it out into more loans. Now it's going to be sold as, hey, we're going to pay you to take out a loan. Well, the suckers that have money in the bank, I'm not saying we're suckers, okay? I'm just kind of doing a circus act here tonight, are going to have to pay to keep their money in the bank. I guess mattress sales are going to go up. What does that mean? Putting money under the mattress. Well, or stuffing the mattress. Well, try getting your hands on currency. And we're going the direction of cashless, as many of you sent to me yesterday and today articles about that are reflective of what we heard coming out of China for the last 30 days, was that COVID-19 can live on currency, and so it's contaminated, and you can become infected by handling printed bills. And so China was saying they were disinfecting the bills and urging people to go cashless. Well, I mean, again, problem, reaction, solution. It's all by design. It's all the whole thing of pushing us into the Libra digital global currency. It's all going that way. Another article that was sent to me today about Libra from a patron was regarding Libra, and they're calling it Libra 2, and that supposedly there were some changes that needed to be made in Libra to accommodate some of the people that were having concerns about Libra. But the bottom line is, the article was rife with the word could. Could. They had various, people that they interviewed, spokespersons, supposedly knowledgeable about the, quote, Facebook Libra, which is complete nonsense. Facebook is one of only, I think, 28 founding members. It's not just Facebook's Libra. But the point is, we've published that. We talked about that in the February issue of Entangled magazine. Okay. The point is, Libra, they were saying it could be this, it could be that, we could change this, we could change that. There was nothing definitive in the article. It was simply to say, hey, there's been concerns and we're addressing it about Libra, but Libra's still rolling out and Libra's still going forward, and it is going to be the global currency. It said it right there in the article. Okay. So yes, you can expect more, machinations about, oh, bankers don't like Libra, or the cryptocurrency, pushers don't like Libra. You're going to see all that back and forth. But the end result is Libra will be the global currency, plain and simple. We know that. Look at the February issue of Entangled. We showed you the founders, we showed you the players, we show you the people even behind the founders that are responsible for bringing Libra forward. Okay? Look at Concordia. That's what we presented in there. Concordia. That's your opening to the rabbit hole. Okay? But to stay on track here with this, they're going to sell negative interest rates as a giveaway to you to take out a loan. But they're going to charge to keep your money in the bank. You're between a rock and a hard place. When that happens, when they start pushing the negative rates beyond just what the President Trump saying we have to do this, it's a good thing. I welcome negative interest rates. It's wonderful if we do that. What a bold-faced liar. But we know that he's just fulfilling his role, and it's scripted and it's just pure garbage. But when we see the plummet into the negative interest rates for loans, that foretells, that's our prognostication. We don't need a quantum computer and AI to do that. We don't need divination to do that. Our prognostication is that they're about to collapse the entire economy of the world. Because you can't push interest rates any lower. Could they go, negative 0.25, negative 0.50, go a full interest percent negative? Sure. I mean, they can go as far negative as they want. But the fact that we go past that tipping point of zero means we're on the real fast track downward towards a debt reset. There's no reason to fear any of this. This is all part of what God has intended all along. Satan's just his instrument of judgment, and the judgment's coming down on the world for what they've created, and that's a system of debt. Debt is enslavement, and God is dealing with enslavement. It's just rolling out step by step. And the one percenters and the central bankers and the politicians, they all think this is wonderful and great, and they're going to enslave everybody in the world, and they're going to be rich. Well, we know the end of that story, folks. We know the end of that. Okay, let me give my poor wife, who's been so patient, the floor for a minute.
No, I've been just reading what's going on and then looking things up in between. Dr. Darnell made a great point. She said there were negative interest rates just before the '08 crash.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So.
Let me go to my links because I do have a list of those prepared. I'll never get to all these links tonight, all these articles. But we'll get to the stuff that's important already. Well, it's all important. Let me find that list. All right, here it is. One of our patrons sent this to me. I'm not going to take credit for having found this. You guys are just all over this stuff. I mean, it is fantastic how much you guys are studying, you're thinking critically, you're looking at this information. That's not the chart I wanted. I'm going to, okay. I had these all grouped together. Here it is. Got it. These are the, quote, Fed emergency rate cuts historically. October 15th, 1998, the interest rates were 5.25%. They were cut to 5, so a quarter point reduction. January 3rd, 2001, 6.5% dropped to 6. April 18th, 2001, 5% dropped to 4.5%. Again in 2001, in September 17th, from 3.5 to 3. August 17th of 2007, from 6.25 to 5.75. January 22nd, 2008, 4.25 to 3.5%. October 8th, 2008, 2% to 1.5%. And as Dr. Darnell was indicating, it then dropped to negative. Now that was the S&P performance. It dropped to 1.5%. It went to 0.5% below. And then in March 3rd of 2020, this year, 1.5% to 1.75%. That was the original number, and then it dropped to 1% in the range of 1% to 1.25%. And actually, yesterday it dropped to 0.9% yesterday, all the way down. And now today it's bounced up to just over 1. So it's a little bit fluid. So yeah, Dr. Darnell, there have been a lot of these cuts in the past. And negative rates, and they don't last long, but they will this time. It'll be permanent. When they slide below 0, it's permanent. This inverted yield curve of the bond market is permanent. It's never coming back up again. Okay, it might bump up, 0.1% like it did today, but it's never going to recover. How can I say that? Because there's too much debt. Just today in the repo market, $105 billion was printed and pumped into the overnight market. And that happens every day. Remember I said that's supposed to be an emergency infusion of liquidity to the banks just overnight. It used to be called a spike, the repo spike. Well, it hasn't been a spike since 2008. Repos have been used every single day by the Fed to continue pumping more liquidity into the market every single day. Without the repo, and again, if you haven't read the magazine this month, you need to get in and look at this terminology. It has a direct impact on your everyday life. It's easy to just kind of push the markets and bonds and things and push it out in quantitative ease and say, it doesn't impact me. It absolutely does, because the first thing it impacts you on is the amount of debt the taxpayers are on the hook for, the amount of bonds. Okay? It means because there's so much debt that there has to be a reset. That's what it means to you and me. All right, so I think I've done enough on maybe the economy. Look at my notes here real quick. Okay. When my last note on economics is when the Fed meets in April and they initiate their second rate cut, or if they do one between now and their April meeting, another emergency cut, what it means to the stock market is the stock market will react as a no confidence, meaning they're realizing there's too much debt, and they're realizing that the interest rates cannot be cut any further. And the market is going to be afraid of zero and negative rates. So there's a very short window in which the market's being pumped up by the infusion of repo money. But when it gets to zero, the markets are going to say enough is enough. We've priced in these moves, meaning the market goes up, pricing in these moves of these discount interest rates. Pricing in means that they're overinflating the value of the stocks. And that overinflation comes from the pumping of more money into the money markets. What it means to you and I when the stock market has a vote of no confidence, it means the market collapses. And we go right into a recession. We go right into a deep recession. And coming all the way back around to COVID-19, it's not a matter of, and yes, there are thousands of people that are infected, people that are dying. I'm not minimizing that. What I am saying is that it's the fear that is disrupting the supply chain, and the supply chain disruption causes fear in the stock market, and fear in the stock market causes more fear in the average layperson, because all they hear is the president going, oh no, the stock market's crashing. Oh no, we're going into a recession. Oh no, there could be a depression. And the average person, that's as far as they think. They have no clue how we got to that point. All they know is what's happening. And so the plummet of the stock market, even though we're not investors, causes fear, causes more disruption, causes a pullback. People don't spend money, and you go into a self-fulfilling prophecy of a recession because people pull back on their spending. And that's normal. That's natural. That's reasonable. Okay? So let's move on to something else here. Let me get back into my notes. If you need to interrupt me, just say so. If there's a question that pops up in the chat room or something you want to address.
Well, they're having some interesting discussions in the chat room tonight. I'm reading as they're going along here.
I hope so. Okay. Let's see. If you give me just a moment. Is Deborah in the chat room? Did you see her? Oh, she made it. Deborah, I apologize.
I know, I just saw her email too.
Okay, I apologize. I send a link directly to Deborah, and I was distracted and I didn't do that, and I apologize, Deborah. I'll try to remember. Let me just read a couple of points on storing water. I know I sent this to you, but for those that haven't read it yet or will hear this later, who are not patrons, again, you want to use those water purification tablets you can buy in the sporting goods stores. You can get them at Walmart, in fact, okay, in their camping section. One option is sodium hypochlorite, which is bleach with no impurities. So you want the bleach that does not have any scent, unscented, regular household bleach. This is for storing water, but you have to be careful with this. So let me read the guidelines. This is from the readystore.com, and this is common. I've read these in multiple locations. But CDC, they talk about filling your containers for water. So CDC guidelines. Number 1, wash the storage container with dishwashing soap and water and rinse completely with clean water. Number 2, sanitize the container by adding a solution made by mixing 1 teaspoon of unscented liquid household chlorine bleach in 1 quart of water. Okay, so teaspoon to a quart of water. That's CDC. Unscented, okay? Cover the container and shake it well so that the sanitizing bleach solution touches all inside surfaces of the container. Wait at least 30 seconds and then pour the sanitizing solution out of the container. This is only step 1. This is how you clean the container. Now, number 5, let the empty sanitized container air dry before use, or rinse the empty container with clean, safe water that is already available. The CDC only recommends using unscented common household bleach for cleaning water supplies if you don't have bottled water or boiling is impractical. They also recommend using it in small quantities. Check the label to see what the percentage makeup of sodium hypochlorite is in the bottle. Here's a chart of how much bleach to add per bleach grade. So, percentage of sodium hypochlorite, this is in your bleach. If it's 1%, use 10 drops per quart or 40 drops per gallon. So most people are going to be using gallon containers. So 40 drops of 1% hypochlorite bleach, that's common household bleach, per gallon. Now, there are other percentages here. I'll read them quickly. 4 to 6% is 8 drops to a gallon. 7 to 10% of hypochlorite will be 4 drops per gallon. Okay? It says here, if the water is cloudy, murky colored, or very cold, double the amount of bleach added. Let the water stand for 30 minutes before using it. Remember that water purification is vital, so stock up on water purification and water filtration systems. That's from the CDC. Okay? Now you can find this. It's very common. If you are not a patron and you listen to this broadcast later, you can find these recommendations at the CDC. Alrighty. Kind of going to jump right through some of these things, as I said at the beginning, pretty quickly. I want to mention the HIV inserts white paper that I've mentioned on previous live streams. The one that was withdrawn, the one that was suppressed, that had the actual information regarding the 4 inserts of the HIV genome sequence, the RNA sequence. And this is what is embedded in that white paper. I've shared with you the graphic here with the 4 squares highlighting the 4 genome sequences that artificially were inserted in the coronavirus COVID-19 RNA genome sequence. That white paper is in my private archives. We've not posted it to the patrons because it would probably be taken down. In other words, I'd be forced to take it down. If you would like a copy of that PDF, the Corona HIV inserts, I will send that to you individually if you email me at anthonypatch.com and use the contact tab at anthonypatch.com, or go to Anthony Patch Author, AUTHOR, at gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send that to you on an individual basis. I'm not going to publicly post this on my website or on Patreon. Okay? Alrighty. I sent you this article. This again is about, the whole nanosensors that are out there in the environment already. And this article is regarding DARPA funding for the study that leverages Profusa's Lumini oxygen platform as part of a larger effort to speed detection and predict disease outbreaks. Profusa and partners announced initiation of study to measure early signs of influenza through biosensor technology. And this is available at prnewswire.com, or if you're a patron, you've already received this. This was dated March 3rd. I'm not going to read this article. We've got a lot to cover, but the point here is that this is a digital healthcare company, and they are producing a biosensor through DARPA funding as a platform to potentially assist in the early detection of influenza outbreaks. Okay? Biosensor.
Well, you can see how that would need to have something to sense, in the if you will. The number one reason for the markers, if you will, and that's I think how they'll refer to them, as biomarkers.
Yeah.
We will know it as the mark of the beast, but these biomarkers will contain all of our immunization records, which is what they want to use as a benevolent reason for everyone to have their own individual records on them, so that if ever in a case of an emergency, they can have their entire health records scanned, and doctors can know if they've had flu shots or whatever shot du jour happens to be required given the sickness or disease or ailment at the time. So
that's right. They have to have that.
They are really going to push for that, and for being able to detect those who haven't, that pose a risk to everybody else. So
what I highlighted as an excerpt for you from this article, I'll read for those that are not patrons. The Lumini oxygen platform can potentially function as a sort of canary in a coal mine for infectious disease, since subtle changes in oxygen at the tissue level may signal trouble and can help clinicians course correct quickly to avoid outbreaks. Now, what this device does is it actually sends a signal to a physician. Okay? This is wiring people up through their sensors. They want to sell it as, this is being sent through to a website or to a physician, to someone who's going to be helping you with your healthcare issue. You can extrapolate from there, folks, how these are being used. So biosensors are nothing that we haven't talked about before, but there are more of these that are being put out. It's inserted under the skin with a syringe, and they're describing it as a string that includes a specially engineered molecule that changes color when the body begins to fight an infection. The other part is an electronic component attached to the skin. It sends light through the skin and detects if the color change occurs, and generates a signal that the wearer can send to a doctor or a website. Okay? So again, the tattoo that we talked about is very similar to what we're describing.
What did that say about changing color again?
It changes color based upon the reaction of the immune system in raising the temperature of the person, and then when that happens, that signal can be sent to a physician. I got water here. It's all right. Yeah.
Interesting.
So it changes color on the skin.
Remember that movie we talked about, Logan's Run?
Yeah.
With the colors, when they reached a certain age, that was it. Life was over.
That's right. Okay, this came in again. We're going to step through these pretty quickly. Jerusalem Post, dated March 4th. Up to 100,000 Israelis in isolation as Israel expands traveler quarantine. This is a quote from Benjamin Netanyahu. "We have to understand we are in the midst of a global epidemic. The most dangerous of these epidemics in the last 100 years. So they're saying anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 people currently in isolation in Israel. Jerusalem Post. Okay. This comes to us from fastcompany.com, again dated today. What an equitable coronavirus response should look like. As the virus spreads, the government response needs to take into account the many people who cannot afford care or a 2-week quarantine away from work. So you can imagine what they're saying in here. What I want to cut to is sort of my commentary on this. And I think I sent this to the patrons. An equitable corona response. Let's piggyback what we just said about the printing of money by the central bank, by the Fed. They can create money digitally. There's no printing that's necessary to come up with $105 billion, right? So if we're already stuck with debt and we're moving towards a debt reset, well, what's the problem with more debt? If that debt is being created for the purpose I'm going to outline right now. People who need care and treatment for this virus, whether they've got insurance or not, whether they can afford a copay or not. If the government was really benevolent and they're willing to pump money into the markets, how about creating money so that every person who's a victim of this virus receives free health care, free treatment? Now, we know about the dangers of vaccines. We know that they're fast-tracking a vaccine. We know that they've been saying, the president and vice president saying, it's going to be a year to a year and a half before a vaccine's even available. We also know that they're going to come up with this miracle vaccine in a shorter time frame. That's predictable on their part. If we want to turn around the AI 180 on them and observe their behavior and be able to prognosticate what the government officials will do, and that is they're going to come out with their wonderful solution. Maybe it's 6 months from now. Maybe it's 4 months from now. But if they come up with a legitimate vaccine, and that's an oxymoron. A legitimate vaccine is an oxymoron. But let's, for the sake of discussion, from a financial standpoint, assume that there's a valid vaccine and people need to be vaccinated. That should be done at no cost. People that are suffering from the symptoms, the flu-like symptoms of the virus, should be treated free at no cost. Because the government can just print up the money to cover the cost. Remember back maybe 20 years ago well, even more than that, 30 years ago. Some of you aren't even 30 years old that are listening. But 30 years ago, there was an insurance crisis. Yeah, it was at least 30 years ago. An insurance crisis in the United States. And all of a sudden, it looked like all of our insurance rates, whether it was life insurance, property, casualty, your liability, automobile insurance, healthcare insurance, was just going to skyrocket. There was a crisis. And insurance companies were claiming that they were too big to fail. And this was before the too big to fail bank crisis of 2008. Well, you can imagine what insurance companies are thinking right now, especially in healthcare, about the cost of this virus to insurance companies. And you can very well expect this whole too big to fail regarding medical health providers, which includes hospitals, county hospitals, saying, hey, we're going bankrupt due to this pandemic. We need an infusion of cash just like the banks got an infusion of cash. Well, I would agree with that. If you're going to go into debt, why not do it in a benevolent way? The unfortunate thing is we don't necessarily have a benevolent government. No government on the planet is benevolent. But from a financial standpoint, that would be my wish. If I was someone who's making wishes, I pray, I don't make wishes. But my hope would be that, hey, free health care. I'm not Bernie Sanders. I'm not talking about saying free health care for every part of the healthcare system. I'm talking about targeted free health care for the issues of COVID-19. Sure, go ahead.
I was just thinking of something, and you and I talked about a lot of different what-if scenarios, but I was just thinking about this coronavirus or whatever virus comes after this or mutates from this, and thinking about currency, and we're trying to figure out all the ways that they're going to try and, sell this cryptocurrency idea and move over to the one world currency. Mm-hmm. What if it's something as simple as saying that, okay, the coronavirus, or again, whatever virus du jour they come up with, can live on surfaces. Currency is the number one transferring of this virus throughout the world. I mean, blaming it on the paper and, is that something that's even plausible, or am I just, that they would say we have to stop paper transfers?
I was, let me take a break here real quick. Come on in. We're just rearranging the furniture a little here. The deck chairs on the Titanic. There you go. Sit right there. Hang on, guys. All right. I'm gonna bring your chair around.
No, don't even. I'm fine.
All right. Okay. All right. Deck chairs on the Titanic.
Not the Titanic. No.
No, we're not. We're still broadcasting here. Okay. So I think that what Kathleen was saying, you were tied up in the chat room. You didn't hear me say at the beginning that they're already talking in this country about the problem of cash currency having the coronavirus on it, and that it needs to be sanitized. And this is what happened in China.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They were talking about, you were tied up in the chat room.
Sorry.
So they will do that, and it doesn't hurt to repeat it. We can expect, again, that that's what they're going to begin talking about and pushing is, hey, just go cashless. I'm going to bring the camera back on here now that the Titanic situation is over. In the studio, want to go back to some of our headlines. This is from livescience.com. I'm just going to read their bullet point. I'm going to read their headlines. Coronavirus cases top 94,000. Next headline. These 5 mistakes could worsen the coronavirus outbreak. Next headline. Here's how you can prepare for the coronavirus outbreak. Again, this is all You can find all of this at livescienceessentials.com, or livescience.com is their shorter URL, livescience.com, these headlines, and you can read these articles for yourself. What are the symptoms of the new coronavirus? Next headline, how deadly is the new coronavirus? Next one, is there a cure for COVID-19? Next, how does the coronavirus compare with seasonal flu? How does the coronavirus spread? How can people spread the coronavirus after they recover? Can wearing a face mask protect you from the new coronavirus? My answer is no. And 12 coronavirus myths busted by science. Now, you'll have to 180 that last one completely. But go to livescience.com and you can read all of those headlines of those articles that they break it down. I think it's a pretty comprehensive overview of the situation. But again, this is going to be coming from the scientific community that is, if you want to put it this way, they are on the side of the CDC. So they're going to flavor all of those articles. They're going to spin it in that direction. Okay? Alrighty. Going to my next article here for you. CDC again. This comes from Neoscope, dated today. This is Neoscope within the website of futurism.com. CDC, get ready to stay at home for a while. Quote, you may need to take a break from your normal daily routine for 2 weeks. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is advising people to get ready to take a break from regular life. During a Tuesday briefing, the CDC's Director of National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases, Nancy Messner, warned that self-imposed quarantines could last weeks. You may need to take a break from your normal daily routine for 2 weeks, she said. Staying home when you are sick is really important. Don't let the illness spread beyond you. Stay away as much as you can from other people. You might see some local communities taking specific actions to mitigate the disease, referring to public places such as schools or other large gatherings could end up closing to help contain the outbreak. All right. They're saying here, that does not mean, however, that the CDC or the U.S. government have imposed any kind of restrictions on public life. Now, let me just parenthetically say, again, as I said, as the test kits roll out and the numbers from the testing come in, you can bank on the CDC and the U.S. government imposing restrictions on public life. Okay? All right. They're saying here a vaccine is likely still 18 months or more away. So they want to hype up the fear. Okay, let's see what else. So staying at home for 2 weeks, that means you have to be prepared now to stay away from the grocery stores and the big box stores for 2 weeks. That's what they're imposing. I'm just going to briefly take a look at the coronavirus global cases from the Johns Hopkins scoreboard. And this is live data that is updated. And I sent this to the patrons before the live stream, and that way you'll have it handy and you can take a look at what's going on globally. It lists the number of confirmed cases by country and region. Right now, the total for the world that Johns Hopkins is producing is 95,265. And they have their map overlaid with the areas of concentration. Now, say what you will about Johns Hopkins. I know many people have sent me emails that they don't trust the data coming out of Johns Hopkins. I don't either. I'm simply offering this to you as a for instance, just a snapshot. And this is what typically mainstream media, when they are putting out info, they're quoting Johns Hopkins. So I'm just giving you the eyeballs onto the website that they're quoting from, okay? Also, excuse me, the Lancet, Lancet, the Lancet, is a medical journal that is published, and they've put out quite a few articles lately, of course, on COVID-19. Many people also have been saying that Lancet is a site that the mainstream media leans on heavily, but it is not a website that necessarily you want to trust. Just like we don't trust the numbers coming out of CDC. And I know that sounds like, I'm one of those wacko guys out there that says, don't trust the government for anything, and, all the other nonsense, the conspiracy theorist stuff. But we always have to do our own research. We have to look for our own sources of information and not just take the blanket statements that are put out by Lancet or by Johns Hopkins or by the CDC. We have to do our own critical thinking. We have to vet the information as best we can on an individual basis. Okay? All right. Interesting. I don't know why they even bring this up, but coronavirus outbreak shutters or closes the F-35 facilities. That's a fighter jet, U.S. fighter jet, F-35 facilities in Japan, Italy. Actually, it includes Italy and Japan in this article coming out of the Pentagon. Lockheed Martin has stopped production of the F-35 components at a Mitsubishi heavy industries factory in Japan and ordered employees at another F-35 facility in Italy to work from home. Well, how do you build aircraft parts from home? Maybe you have a 3D printer. All right, pretty ridiculous stuff here. Okay. Now, numbers in the United States. This comes from Gizmodo. Today's date, actually at 7:30 this morning, Eastern Time. Every coronavirus case in the United States in the last 24 hours. The U.S. reported 21 new coronavirus cases during the last 24 hours as the number of infected continues to climb. Now remember, those numbers are without testing. These are people that are presenting themselves to doctors and clinics and hospitals who are exhibiting the signs and symptoms, the flu-like symptoms. There's no CD test kit testing going on at this point. So these numbers are very, very low. But remember what I said earlier. When the test kits roll out, the numbers are produced and blessed by the government as valid. That's when people are going to panic. Okay? At least 9 people have died from COVID-19 in the U.S., all in Washington state, and there are currently at least 129 cases of the disease across the country. Again, according to the online tracker maintained by Johns Hopkins University. And they do some background here. California, 5 new cases. And Florida, 1 new case. Massachusetts, 1 new case. This is all published today, this morning. New Hampshire, 1 case. New York, 1 new case. North Carolina, 1 new case. Washington, 8 new cases and 3 new deaths. So, those numbers would lead most people to think that it's not a big deal in the United States. But I'm going to continue to underscore this. This is without testing going on. So it lulls people into a false sense of security, thinking, hey, The U.S. has a better healthcare system, has a better tracking system. People are able to get into clinics early. Somehow we must be smarter and better and more immune than other people in the rest of the world that are suffering from the spread of COVID-19. Well, it's only because the testing isn't taking place, but also it's underreported. Many of you have sent me articles from local health care agencies, local health departments that are trying to get their numbers out, but it's being suppressed at the federal level. They know that there are more cases. How can you have one case in a state, one new case in an entire state? I don't care what state it is. That's absurd. So the numbers are being suppressed. That's easy to assume. But that's so, and why would they be suppressed? That's the natural question. Why would the numbers be suppressed by the federal government? Because they don't want people to prepare. You have, on the one hand, saying, hey, you're going to have to be ready to stay away from your workplace and public places for 2 weeks. Well, isn't that kind of like saying you need to prepare? Not enough people read that. Not enough people pay attention to that warning of 2 weeks. Because most of the mainstream media is saying, hey, we only have one case here, one case over there, a few people here, Washington State, we got a lot of cases, but that's just Washington State. So the average person watching whatever news broadcast, it doesn't matter what network it is, thinks, hey, I don't have to go to my big box store and stock up. I don't need to learn about how to store water. It's going to blow over. The government's going to take care of it. CDC's on top of it. All these people that are running around to the big box stores are conspiracy theorists, right? We're all the nuts. We're all the crazies. Well, when those stores are overrun, and I know I'm repeating what I said at the beginning of the live stream, but when those stores are overrun and the parking lots are filled with criminals and the streets adjoining those neighborhoods where those big box stores are rampant with criminals, those people are going to be out of luck. Okay? So be reasonable and be prudent. Now what I want to do is, Kathleen's been kind enough to really focus on the chat room tonight, and I want to take your questions, take your comments, respond to how you are responding to all this, what I've presented tonight, but also the things that you're paying attention to. So what do we got on the chat room, Kathleen?
Well, you've been talking, so nobody's asked any specific questions. They could type them in now if they want to.
Go ahead and post your questions in there, folks. But while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and go back to our scripture just to reinforce this. And I am making these broadcasts available a couple of days after we conduct our live stream. I open this up to the public because this information needs to get out to everybody. I just hope that people who are not patrons will support what we're doing here and become involved and get, by way of joining as a patron, you will get access to my monthly Entangled magazine, and it has a lot more detail than we're able to cover on the air. But Isaiah 41:10, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will surely help you. I will uphold you with my right hand of righteousness. God is not a liar. Okay? He says he's with you. Don't be afraid. I'm your God. I'll strengthen you. I'll help you. I'll uphold you with my right hand of righteousness. And forgive me, Lord, but you can take that to the bank. Okay?
I have a question.
Okay, good.
All right. People are asking if can animals transfer this virus? Some are saying that they can. Someone said that a dog tested positive.
Right.
What do you say?
Well, at this point, I don't think we can trust any of the reports. Whether this is transmittable by animals or not, I would say this. I think that they can be a conveyor, if you will. They can be what's known as a vector, a carrier, without having flu-like symptoms. How does a dog have flu-like symptoms? I don't know. I'm not a veterinarian. But the point is, can an animal, think about the plague. The plague was carried by rats. The rats were the vectors. So, can animals carry as a vector the COVID-19? I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist. I would say it would be very likely, simply from a physical standpoint. If we know that at least what we can expect to be truthful information is that COVID, like most viruses, does survive on flat horizontal surfaces. I mean, outside of COVID-19, this is typical of any virus, that it will remain alive on flat surfaces. So, would an animal be considered a flat surface? I would say so. Can they therefore carry? Can they be a vector? I would say so. Can they get infected? That's a whole nother discussion, and I can't answer that. I know there are reports out there of animals and dogs having this. It could be. I don't know, because this is engineered, and it's specifically genetically modified, engineered. The sequencing of it is orchestrated. It may be that it is specific only to humans in that engineering, but I don't know. I can't answer that. But I'm certainly paying attention to the reports regarding animals. That opens up a whole new can of worms. I don't know if worms can be vectors. But boy, if we have to worry about our pets, our dogs and our cats and our parakeets and our animals are our family. Even if our cats are mean, we don't. But my mother-in-law has a cat. But we don't have pets. Yeah, go ahead.
Pam wants to know, how are people being tested at this point?
Okay.
What determines the diagnosis?
Right. How are people being tested? They're actually not being tested in the sense that there's a test kit, but they are being tested by way of blood samples and saliva, bodily fluids, okay? Saliva testing and blood testing. And in the blood testing, well, you can do this with saliva as well, but they're doing DNA testing. They're sequencing, they're looking for the sequence of COVID-19 in the patients. So it's the testing that occurs when a person presents them to a healthcare provider. When I talk about test kits, these are things that are being distributed throughout the community, and they will be distributed through clinics and probably at schools and probably at community centers, and they will have nursing assistants, probably paramedics, EMTs. I mean, they'll bring it right down to the first responder level in order to get the kits distributed as widely as possible and get as many people tested as possible. They will enlist anyone who is considered a healthcare provider, and that includes a basic EMT, okay, which is below a paramedic level. Basic EMT will be taught how to administer the testing kits. But right now what's going on is people who are presenting themselves to a doctor, to a clinic, to a Department of Health facility, emergency rooms, that kind of thing. And then they are being tested by sampling saliva and drawing blood samples. Okay? Good questions. Keep them coming. I'm watching the chat room too. Let's see. Jonathan, they have a mask. They have a mask that has test strips in it so you can breathe in to the mask and it shows if you have the virus. Oh, okay. Test strips in a mask to tell if you have the virus. Interesting. I hadn't seen that, Jonathan. Thank you. That's something else for me to take a look at and to research into. But just to kind of reiterate, for those that didn't hear the first broadcast regarding COVID-19, where we talked about masks, the N95, the one that has that little square or round port, that little cover on the mask, okay, filters out 95% of known viruses and known bacteria. 95%. That's why they call it an N95. But, and again, I was specific, and I always try to do that, the size of particle that an N95 will block, will filter out, is a 0.3 micron particle. So if you want to call it a biological or a bacteria or a virus, a biological material that is 0.3 microns or larger will be filtered by an N95 mask. Now here's the catch, here's the punchline. COVID-19 is 0.1, not 0.3, it's 0.3 microns in diameter. It's smaller, so it passes through the filter of the N95 mask. If you were to really pinpoint and pin down an epidemiologist and say, is the N95 going to protect you from COVID-19? The epidemiologist would say no, but it's better than nothing, and that's what I'm saying. It's better than nothing. If you turn this 180 degrees around and imagine someone who has the signs and symptoms, flu-like symptoms. In other words, they have a productive cough and they're sneezing. The 180 here is that they are blocking their bodily fluids from escaping the 6 feet of distance that CDC is telling us. Within 6 feet, the virus can be transmitted by someone who's coughing or someone who even just has the symptoms and they're not coughing. The fact that they have the virus in their body and they may not be symptomatic, they may not even have an elevated temperature, they're a carrier. Anyone within 6 feet of that carrier can contract the virus. But in the case of productive coughing and sneezing, the mask acts as a physical barrier because, of course, those are larger than 0.3 microns, those fluids. So they're physically blocked. So it's better than nothing. But it's the inhalation. See, that little port, it's a valve that closes when you inhale. You're actually sucking the valve closed. It's a little disc, or it may be square in some cases, but it's a little piece of Teflon. It's a piece of plastic that closes off that port so that the only air that can arrive at your mouth and nose has to pass through the filter of the mask itself. But COVID penetrates that filter. But it's better than nothing. Am I going to run around out in public wearing an N95 mask? Nope. Am I suicidal? Nope. Comes back to what we've talked about several times before and what we said here tonight. I rely on my relationship with Jesus Christ, my faith in Jesus Christ, his changing of our DNA, which then changes our biology, and it results in the full armor of God. My faith is that God will protect me from COVID-19. Well, that kind of parenthetically or in a tangent takes me off to someone in the public sector who has contracted COVID-19, or possibly, I should say, COVID-19. Some stories, some articles are saying that the Pope actually has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Others are trying to say, no, he just has the flu. Well, some people might say, well, gee, what about the Pope getting it? Well, if the Pope gets it, then you're going to get it. I don't know the Pope's relationship with Jesus Christ. I don't know. But my faith is in Jesus Christ, in the Lord providing. I am not going to buy a mask, and I'm not going to wear a mask. But you know what? I'm also, as I've said to you, I'm reasonable and prudent. So I'm avoiding large concentrations of people. I'm not going to the movie theater. I'm not going to the ball games. I'm avoiding the crowds. That's reasonable and prudent. Okay? But beyond that, I'm just going to live a normal life. Okay? Questions? What do we got?
Chris was saying, do you believe the mortality rate to be accurate at 3.4%?
The mortality rate, do I believe it at 3.4% as accurate? No. I don't believe any numbers. And it comes from not just being, pejorative or being, obnoxious. It comes from, how do I know? How can I validate? I'm not there to see these people. I'm not there to see the blood draws. I'm not there to see the sequencing of the genome and read it for myself on individual cases. So, I'm going to default to no. I don't trust any of the numbers because I can't prove it one way or the other. But I think the numbers are there for a purpose, and that is to generate fear at a low level right now. And then the numbers that are going to come from testing, when those kits are distributed, are going to be that tipping point where people are just going to go nuts. And those numbers I don't have to have reported to me. All I have to do is listen to the streets and look out on the streets with my own eyes and ears and see the craziness. Because it's coming. Okay? Okay, any other questions? Watching the chat room. All right. Oh yeah, Debbie says, and it could be on a piece of mail. Imagine that. Imagine the specter. Okay? Jeez. Who writes letters anymore? But, we're still getting snail mail. We get all the garbage mail. We get all the, flyers and literature and things. We get packages, Those of us that are buying things that are delivered. Look at Amazon. Debbie, I want to thank you. You just triggered a thought in this old head of mine. I was talking about the government, if they were going to be benevolent, offsetting the cost of taking care of this pandemic by making, if the vaccine is valid, making it free to everyone. People that have the signs and symptoms that are being that need treatment, suffering the pneumonia, et cetera, getting free health care related specifically to COVID-19. I think, that's where debt on the part of the government would be a good thing. To print up that money, so to speak, digitally and spend that money for people. Now, where I'm going with this, now that I recap that, look at Amazon. We could look at Alibaba out of China, but I just forget about that. Look at Amazon in the United States. Look at its infrastructure. Look at its distribution system. Look at its delivery system. You can order food and have it delivered in the same day. Why can't you have medications that take care of at least the signs and symptoms? Your fever, your cough, your colds, your congestion, the pneumonia type effects. I'm not even talking about the vaccine, but just the distribution of cold medications, flu-like medications, paid for by the government through Amazon, a pre-existing infrastructure of immediate delivery. It's already there. Will it be utilized? I doubt it. But that's something that also that the government could pay Amazon to do. And it's already there, and it's a turnkey system. Suppose there was a valid vaccine available. Suppose it was something that could, as a liquid, could be sprayed from a syringe with no needle, but a syringe into each nostril. You just inhale and spray it in. We saw this in the movie Contagion. Okay, we watched that movie. I think it came out in 2015. But in the movie Contagion, that's how the vaccine was administered. It was just inhaled through the nose. No needle involved. Well, those could be distributed by Amazon. Again, if we're talking valid vaccines, we're talking that they don't have mercury in them and other adjuvants, and that this is a benevolent thing that would roll out, it could be done virtually overnight through Amazon. I doubt it'll ever happen. Go ahead.
You know, I've been noticing where I work and with my own email that people and companies are starting to capitalize on this. You know, something as simple as, say, Thrive and some of these food places that make deliveries to your house. You know, you can pick meal plans. And so they're starting to advertise now in terms of, you know, be prepared, have us deliver your meal so you don't have to go out and and face this virus. Or speaking to companies now about getting meeting systems in place such as Zoom, so that when employees are home, they can still do work from home.
Yep.
And again, it smacks, I think, of the Antichrist spirit, which is all about dividing humanity and isolating men from one another, so that there is no face-to-face communication, and that it's basically moving all of humanity onto a platform where they have to interface with technology.
Yep.
And that's ideally what he wants, because that's where his spirit is embedded right now. We have shown that. You know, earlier somebody talked about Matthew 24:15. I think it was Deborah. And she was taught, there was an interesting discussion going back and forth, of course, you know, about Revelation and the end days and rapture or no rapture, the whole thing. And, you know, it quotes the prophet, it quotes about when you see the abomination that causes desolation setting itself up in the temple, as foretold by the prophet Daniel. Well, we have spent umpteen hours talking about the prophet Daniel, his education in magic. We have shown people, you know, the connection to divination, and how we have established, I think, very well, how Satan is enthroned in the temple of technology. So to see that abomination taking place and taking up residence in the temple of the human body, to the point of the infiltration of our cells to manipulate RNA and DNA using technological methods to do that, is that not Satan manifesting within humanity now?
As the abomination.
And what does it say after that? When you see this, those in Judea flee to the mountainside. So I looked that up. Judea was east of the Jordan, which is also where Damascus and Syria are. And to flee to the mountains meant a refuge. Are we not seeing in our modern time humans having an infiltration of technology bearing upon their human molecular cellular structure, being changed physically?
Yep.
And do we not see also
I know it sounds crazy, but refugees in Syria going out now, fleeing. So this is how it's working out and playing out in our time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just food for thought, again, and that jumped off the page at me when I was looking at it. But, the isolation and the using of technology to get your food. I mean, again, don't overlook the obvious. Even though there isn't a biological marker on human skin right now, they may be able to detect, like this virus, certain things through the current technology that they have. But it's the spirit behind it that seeks to cause men to be islands, in and of themselves. That they're not interacting in the way that humans are supposed to, face to face.
Mm-hmm.
He's already done so much to divide families. I mean, how many times do we go out to a restaurant and you just see people sitting there and the whole family is sitting around and they're all texting? They go out of their house to sit around a table and they don't even talk to each other. The kids text, the parents text, everybody's sitting around the table texting. Nobody's talking to each other.
Well, the kids are talking about their parents. They're texting across the table.
I mean, so, that smacks of the Antichrist spirit.
Sure it does. Yep.
And now he will use whatever opportunity is created to capitalize on putting technology at the forefront.
Yep.
And then making excuses saying, oh no, this will make your life easier. Well, is life really all about everything in the world being easy? Is everybody going to have an absolutely blissful life if everything in the world becomes easy? No.
Convenience. The convenience sales pitch.
It makes for lazy people that don't appreciate anything.
That's right. All right, so we're at 2 hours. Thank you. And again, we're respectful of your time, so we always try to keep things right on schedule here. I want to thank you for being with us again this evening. And please don't walk away with a feeling of fear and trepidation over all of this, despite all the things I've presented to you tonight. It's just, one, it should reinforce your faith through your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The other is, as we've said in the last few live streams, this is an opportunity. 180 all this stuff. Use it as evidence to witness, to bring others to Jesus Christ. To bring all this that is coming down upon the world and say, look, don't you think it's about time you got serious about turning to God? Now, I just noticed in the chat room, Tam has a question for you. So Tamara, go ahead and put the question up there again. We'll take just a moment. Let me see if I can find it, if she put it up earlier.
And someone else was asking, do you think we're under medical martial law?
Not yet.
Not yet.
It's coming. Tamara asked, did I get my email question? I haven't looked at my emails, but I'm sure I did. Your questions and postings always come through, so no problem. I'll take a look at that, Tamara. It would be too distracting for me to do that during the live stream, so I apologize. Okay, let's see.
Someone in chat, I don't know if it was Tamara, was saying that they had a friend that works, I don't know if it was something like they worked on the docks, and they said that shipments are going to stop soon. If I recall correctly, I don't know.
I mean, we've discussed the effect in the ports in China with the shipping virtually at a standstill for a month now, and ships that were trying to dock in China ports, especially in Wuhan, in Hubei province, were being diverted even to other countries. And we had warned, again, last several live streams, that the supply chain disruptions would take place, in that the products that were expected from China would never arrive in the ports. So it doesn't surprise me that they're cutting off in the ports shipments. And I know that the U.S. Navy has also required all of the ships that are arriving on the U.S. West Coast that have made ports of call anywhere in the Eastern Pacific, so China, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, etc., they have to self-quarantine the ship off the west coast of the United States for 14 days at a minimum. So even our own sailors and our own ships are being prevented from making port. And therefore it doesn't surprise me if incoming cargo ships to the west coast, and eventually that will happen with the east coast as well, will all come to a grinding halt. Okay? So the bottom line effect of COVID-19 is not so much the virus itself, but it is the disruption of the supply chain worldwide. That's the real issue. So be prudent and be prepared. Okay? Alrighty. So we will get back together, Lord willing, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And keep sending me your information. As I always say, don't feel like I've seen it before or you're sending too much. Just send it. Okay?
And prayers for Pam.
And tonight has been an opportunity to kind of reflect back what you've been sending to us. And yeah, go right ahead and make mention, Kathleen.
I was just going to say prayers for Pam. I talked to her tonight and she sounds so sick. And as you know, Pam has come through cancer treatment recently, and so her immune system, I'm sure, is, struggling to get back up to that level of being healthy and strong. So Pam, you are in our thoughts and prayers. And let me just pray real quick. Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for everyone who was able to join us. We ask you to touch all of those, Lord, who are within our little group here, that you would protect them and provide for them and keep us healthy, Lord, against all that's coming against our world. Protect your children. We pray specifically for Pam, Lord, as well, who needs a special touch from you to strengthen her and to drive this sickness out of her and this terrible fever, Lord. And we just speak to that infirmity and ask that you would deliver her from that and grant her strength. We pray for Andy, Lord, as he comes up for this promotion. We ask that you show favor to him, Lord, and that he will be granted the desires of his heart. And for any personal requests, Lord, that you know that he desires and is brought before you. And Father, we just thank you and ask you to be with and comfort all of those people, Lord, who have suffered through a horrendous night of tornadoes. The devastation and destruction is astounding, Lord, in Tennessee. And so we pray right now for every family and for those officials, Lord, who have the task of finding housing for people and clothing and food. We pray now that all those mega churches that are down there in Tennessee will rally together and put their faith in action and get out there on those streets and help those people. We pray right now that your children, Lord, called by your name, will rise up and show themselves worthy of your character by reaching out and helping their neighbors, Lord. And we pray that that you will protect us from the elements that are just raging right now, Lord. And we just thank you for your ability to save, your ability to provide. Speak to each and every one of us in our circumstances, Lord, with how we best prepare for what lie ahead. And Lord, again, we just ask for your supernatural protection and favor and provision. And please watch over and grant everyone here a peaceful night's sleep, Lord, undisturbed by evil, that when their heads hit the pillow, Lord, that their sleep will be sweet. And we ask this in Jesus' name, amen.
And I also want to mention Greg, George, Charles, Randy, Richard. Just off the top of my old head, those are the names I can think of right now. Debbie as well. Mary. And I'm so bad with names. I apologize. But we are keeping you in our prayers, and I want to acknowledge those emails that I've already answered to you, but again, within this group, bring those names forward so that you will be mindful of our patrons that are all in need. And specifically, most of these are health issues. And we pray for the financial issues that everyone is confronting right now. So, Lord willing, we'll be back together on Thursday, 7 p.m. And